So to start, let me introduce tonight's guest panelists. First, Madeline Bell is a graduating senior from our own Smith Academy. She currently serves as Vice President of the Smith Academy Student Equity Alliance and has attended Hatfield Public Schools for her entire student career. Second, Dr. Jalil Johnson has lived in Hatfield with his wife and 3 children for 4 years. He is a healthcare executive for the Center for Human Development, a large behavioral health agency that provides psychiatric, clinical, and social services to communities throughout Western Massachusetts. He is an award-winning author with clinical specialties in primary care, psychiatry, substance abuse, and substance use disorders. Throughout his career, he has worked on initiatives focused on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before I open up with the questions, I want to remind each of us to keep in mind the following. All questions and comments are welcome as long as they are respectful to all people. This courtesy extends to people who are not present. There are no expectations that anyone in the discussion will use the most current and socially acceptable terms to describe a person, groups of people, or situations. Do not let fear of not knowing the right term damper your participation. The only expectation is that everyone is respectful and kind. So to start off, what are your general impressions about the film? Start us off.
I mean, it's a tough act to follow. My first impressions are that that's an amazing group of young people that they gathered, who articulated a lot of the ideas and concepts really well. And there was only really one group or demographic that I saw that was missing, but I think I'll speak to that at some point later.
Okay. Ms. Bell?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was really great to see the perspective of a lot of young people from a lot of different backgrounds. And I think that I don't know where to start with it, but it was very interesting to see all those perspectives, and I think it's really important that we have these discussions, especially with young people, because times are changing and our culture is changing to be hopefully more accepting, and I think it's important to focus on the ways that we could change as society changes as well.
So we have many questions from the audience, so we're going to just kind of dive right in. Do economics make a significant difference in people's judgment of others, in our thoughts about race?
One more time.
Does economics make a significant difference in people's judgment of others in thoughts about race?
I think so. I think that generally, at least in the experience from what I've seen, I don't want to speak on behalf of things that I'm not aware of, because again, I do have a limited viewpoint and I only know what I've seen from media and from speaking to other people. But I do think that economic standing does hold a hand with race, and therefore people's economic status has to do with how we view them as well as race. I think that a lot of them go hand in hand, and you can see, like, due to racism in the past, a lot of groups that are non-white have a lot more issues economically because of these perpetuated issues that are so present in society and that are so deeply ingrained in how we, as like a capitalist nation, view jobs and we view opportunities and stuff like that. So I do think it has a hand in it definitely has a hand in how we view people in general, how we view class, but race and class have a very close relationship, and I think that they play off of each other.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think, historically we know that there's lots of policies that people have made over the years, redlining and that sort of thing, we just sort of boxed people in and limited their opportunity to some degree as groups, but not as individuals. And subsequently, you have, the situation where stereotypes are then reinforced, right? So then you have these people, they don't like to work. Well, there are no jobs where they live, right? And that was intentional and perpetuated by governments and systems and so forth and so on, right? So there may be instances where a person is not overtly trying to be a bigot or trying to be racist. However, the only reality they know is that the racist stereotypes have been perpetuated, so their view is that they're somewhat true, especially if they don't consider all of the historical context.
What more can be done, or what more can we do to lean into our discomfort?
That's a good question. I think that applies to issues beyond issues around race and racism. If you think about any culture or any subculture, there's an infinite amount of information out there that's available. So we cannot know everything about any individual or any group of people or any culture. One of the things I think can be helpful is to shift how we think about that. One of the things that I think can help us think through that is there's this idea that any of us who's worked in any kind of professional setting, you've heard of cultural competence, which is this idea that you get some slides, they tell you about a group, you've now learned everything you need to know about them, you're now free to go on and work, right? Which is false, right? So there's another idea of cultural humility, which is more of a lifelong learning, continuous education when it comes to people that are different than you. And if you sort of look through that lens, it helps you to say, okay, I don't know everything, and that's a continuous state, and I am sort of always open to stepping into something that is uncomfortable or different or beyond my knowledge base. So just shifting how we think about conversations that are difficult, I think, is one thing we can do. But I also think you have to think about it as being vital and essential for change. You cannot move the barometer on any of these issues if people don't step into an uncomfortable space and having uncomfortable conversations so that they can learn or teach others or do whatever needs to happen so that people can grow. We tend to not do that because it's a lot easier to stay in our little bubble where we feel really safe. So I think, shifting the way that we think about things, and then secondly, trying to step in and lean into some of those conversations intentionally.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a big emphasis as of right now towards guilt and feeling guilty for the privilege you have. But I really think that emphasizing this part of it is detracting from the conversation, because you take the focus away from the actual issues and you focus on like, oh, well, I feel bad. Feeling bad isn't really going to change anything. So what you have to do is you have to take that discomfort and that understanding that, okay, I'm in a position of privilege and that I feel bad about that, and you have to transform it into change. And I think that discomfort is necessary for, recognizing and changing circumstances.
I would agree. I would also say that, we all have different kinds of privilege. I walk through the world with education, being a man, other kinds of privilege, and sometimes I'm called out on that, and someone lets me know that I am moving in a way that may be offensive to other people. And my honest and immediate reaction is to be mad and get away from them. But if I can hold it for a moment, usually takes longer than that, but if I can hold it for a moment, I can kind of recalibrate and realize that, I just had an experience, but that person also had an experience. And that person, they said something about it, but other people probably also had that experience. So I have been affecting people with my privilege, and I didn't realize that. So that's an opportunity to kind of step into it rather than run away from it. Just one thing we can do.
Very, very interesting. For the white majority, let's see if I can read that. So for the white majority, without catering, not sure I can, maybe I gotta read the other side here. There we go. How can school leaders, teachers ensure that students of color are comfortable and not made to feel singled out when we have conversations about race and racism in an overwhelmingly white school?
This is a fascinating question. I'm a person of color. I work in a world full of white people. And everything's fine for the most part. But I will say, my wife will attest to this, every single time that there are issues around race, I am the person who has to show up and have the conversation, right? Also, just in general, when we are having conversations or talking about anything that's related to race, it can certainly feel like everyone is looking at you for your reaction or your response, and that can be really difficult. I think it's also okay to name it. I think that can be helpful, to just say, that people are maybe having an experience, and to give people an opportunity to step into that or to step back from it. I also went to a school that was an all-white school, right? So I also had that experience. And then I live in Hatfield, so I will send my children to an all-white school, and they're little brown people as well. So this kind of thing is not going away. And I'll let you speak to what you think teachers and administrators can do about that. But I think giving people a space to move is fine, and giving them the option to comment on it or to be involved or to not is really important. I don't think you can get it right, but you could certainly get it wrong. And it's a delicate thing. I don't really have the answer, to be honest.
So I'm a member of the Student Equity Alliance. This is kind of a question we've been trying to answer all year. I think that our primary focus has to be, as something you said earlier about how, whenever there's an issue of race, you always have to feel like you're the one that has to step in and talk about it. I've noticed that this happens a lot in our school system because it's majority white, where there was actually a specific situation at the beginning of our founding of the club where there was a girl in the group who was, making some comments that were not necessarily proper, and we were saying to her, like, okay, I was telling her, I was like, you can't do that, I articulated why there was a problem with it. She said, well, I don't want to hear it from you because you're white, have her tell me instead. And I say, which I can understand, because it's sort of like an idea of, yes, you're right, I don't have that experience, and I am speaking on behalf of something that I'm not a part of. But at the same time, it's not fair to expect people of color to teach you and be your educator. You can do that research on your own, and it's important that you take some level of self-awareness, and you don't rely on those people and act like it's their responsibility to teach you, and it's their responsibility to coach you through it. I think that's what I've noticed.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking, maybe there's something that we could talk about in that regard. So I think, teachers and administrators of schools certainly walk with some authority and are given authority just by the nature of their role. And using that authority, not necessarily penalize people, but to sort of neutralize these kinds of microaggressions or comments that people make. And I hate to use the term like zero tolerance, but to sort of across the board when it comes to any kind of microaggressions or even overt aggressions towards people, as we said in the opening, whether they're present or not, and just making sure that that is the baseline, that is the standard. So that, if, as a concrete example, if there's a little child in a room and that person is a little brown boy, and someone gets to make fun of a chubby girl, then that means all of a sudden that's okay, right? So the teacher is sort of setting the stage as, no, we don't get to do that to anyone for any reason, whether they're present or not. Empowers that little brown boy. He sort of knows, okay, I am kind of protected in that way. So I think that can be really helpful.
I think there was a reference in the film about people of color are not your Google, right?
I laughed at that one.
I thought that was very apropos. How can we combat falsehoods like the replacement theory?
I mean, it's true. It's not false. By 2050, most of the people in the United States will be people of color. That's happening.
Yeah.
So we can also just not act like it's not happening. The world is getting smaller. People are intermarrying. Groups of people are mixing with each other. It's even harder now to really distinguish what is race anyway, but what a person's race is, and that'll be less distinguishable over time. Let's not act like that's not happening, first of all. Secondly, I think, the people that have those ideas and beliefs are really on the fringes. And this kind of goes hand in hand with the group that I saw that I thought was missing from the film. I was just waiting for like the stereotypical middle-aged white man redneck. Where is that person? That person is the person that we need in the conversation, right? The person that is stereotypical, on the fringes, has far out ideas. That person is the one we need to engage with. Everybody in this room believes all of this already, right? But that person is missing.
Great point.
I don't know if I really have much to add to that, but I do think that, sociologically it is true that the replacement theory is a real thing, and I don't think that quelling the fear is something that's necessarily possible, because the people who are afraid of it are the people that do have these deep-rooted racist beliefs. Right. And it's a great idea to want to change and fix people, but a lot of people don't want to be fixed and changed, and as unfortunate as that is, it's difficult to, especially when people are so afraid of something, it's especially difficult to change their belief and change their fear. So
yeah, I mean, I came from a tiny little town in western Tennessee, less than 10,000 people, and there were some people that had some really terrible ideas, and I can just tell you personally, this is a thing that happens to people of color, but I was an athlete, so I was okay. I was accepted. Lots of people who did not like black people liked me, right? And then over time, these people knew me and I knew them, and they were just a little bit less of these bigots, a little bit less racist, because I was humanized all of a sudden. I was a regular person. I had brothers and sisters and a family and a mom and a dad. So it's kind of hard to hate a person when you actually know who they are. So that's from my personal experience, that had those people not actually had me as a point of reference, they might still have those ideas. And this is the reason why I say some people do not want to change. They have no interest in being different. But every person that has those kinds of ideas that you can bring closer to, the idea of humanizing these people and not othering them, it's just another person that you may rescue from that ideology. And those people perpetuate those things. So if it stops at one generation, maybe they don't reproduce and continue to have more of these people with these kinds of ideas. So I do think that demographic of people that have fringe ideas, I think it is important to try to reach them in some way if we actually want to make change and not have tragedies like the ones that have recently happened.
Is there any time in history, and obviously we can only kind of look at American history, but from your schooling, from your experiences, are there times in history where America has weathered the kind of divide that we're currently in and moved forward in a positive way? Do you have a sense that there's something at the other side of the political divide that we're having and experiencing right now around race that is maybe at the core of what we're doing?
I mean, this has happened over and over again throughout American history. We see this playing out, through different civil rights movements and women's suffrage and all of that. We've seen this happen over and over again, and, we take 2 steps forward and 1 step back, it feels like. But I have a son, and he's 15 years old, and he looks just like me. So I asked him what his experience is like with racism and bigotry, and he has a diverse group of friends, and I certainly experienced all kinds of racism growing up, and still do today. I don't talk about it much. So I wanted to check in with him, and he said he and his friends sort of laugh at those people because they're old. So I thought, well, that's interesting. There's a generation of people who think, wow, you're still racist? You're like, you're an old person. And I thought, wow, that's because they are having a completely different experience. And there'll be iterations of that. And my children, my little children, will have, I'm sure they will also experience some degree of racism or bigotry or whatever, but it will be probably to a lesser degree than my grandmother experienced, right? So I think that this is kind of growing pains. Sometimes it's more terrible than others.
Eddie?
I mean, I could just add to that and say that I definitely think that, being in high school and seeing people that are being with people who are younger every day, there's definitely been a shift from like my parents' generation and all that to be, I also think that helps that we're in Massachusetts, but not accepting of racist ideas and all that. But yeah, I think it's definitely become a lot less outright. However, we can't pretend that it doesn't exist just because it's not violent and loud and hateful anymore. It still exists, it's just in small ways, like little ways, microaggressions, things like that. There's still undercurrents. And even though things are getting better, and we should be very happy and proud of that, I think it's important to acknowledge that it still exists and to not just pretend it's gone because it's not as apparent anymore.
So, in our final minutes this evening, I want to kind of move towards maybe some solution space. So in education, some of what you've both talked about is we refer to as growth mindset, that we need to look at how to grow and learn and continuously learn. But some of the film talked about it, some of our policies almost keep groups apart, right? So, we have housing developments that low income stay in, or, we have Indian reservations that keep Indians, Native Americans, indigenous people, in one area. How do we move forward to bring people together when much of our policies still really keep us where we are in our sort of, for lack of a better word, defined spaces?
Yeah, I think there are 2 concrete things. One is, you have to have the policymakers in agreement that you have to have this kind of social, ethnic, racial integration of people, and that diversity is good. There are, if you look across any, most places in the United States, who makes the policies? These are middle-aged white men, and they help make the laws, right? So I think, we have to engage with people who make policy and help them with kind of creative solutions. I also think that on a that's sort of concrete, but then on a softer side of that, any kind of social event where you can get multiple groups of people or different kinds of people engaged is a way to just bring communities together, right? You can think of if you go to Look Park because they're having some event, and you see people from Holyoke, you see people from Springfield, you see people from the hill towns, you see, depending on what it is, you can see people from all over all of a sudden there. And they didn't come there to be together, but they happen to all be there, and it's a way of just getting people out of their little bubbles and exposed to each other. And I think through doing that, you sort of soften these ideas, these fixed ideas about people being other and different. Because if your kids are playing together, or if you sat down and had a hot dog with someone that was completely different than you, then maybe you don't feel so bad about it, or maybe some of the ideas that you have get a little softer. On the other side of that, if people who make policy and make laws and segregate people intentionally or unintentionally get wind of that they aren't, the people of whatever part of Hatfield or Northampton don't like those kind of people, if they know that, then they're going to probably try to perpetuate that. If they know that the people actually want to have a more integrated town or city, then they will do that because they want to stay in office. They'll do whatever the people want, but they have to know the people want it, and the people don't know what they don't know what they're missing unless they have the experience. So I think you can kind of work at it from both angles.
Thank you. Maddie?
I honestly would say that I don't think that I am educated enough to make much of a comment on this, and I don't want to just be saying things just to say things, but I definitely think that there needs to be more of a focus on, just integrating things, getting in touch with policymakers and hopefully diversifying the people who make the laws for us, because as he said, it's majority old white men, and they're a little out of touch with the modern times sometimes. And I think that it's important that we extend our policy and our understanding to a broader group of people.
I agree. I'll also give a disclaimer. I often, because I work in healthcare, and because most of the studies that are done, the initial ones are done on middle-aged white men, so I often reference that, but that is not derogatory. Those are just facts. That's not, I hope, not insulting to anybody. It's really just saying that's the demographic that makes the laws in our country.
Just look at the Senate.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, but I know that sometimes people can feel a little offended or poked at or made fun of or singled out in that way, and I would not like that. So I am intentionally saying that was not my intention by saying that.
Yes, it's not inherently bad to be an old white man, but they shouldn't be the only ones making laws.
Thank you. Well said.
Well, I see we're coming to the end of the hour. I want to really thank both of you for being our panel this evening. You did a fabulous job. I want to thank our audience. It's great to have you all here this evening. I'm going to try not to think of myself as an old white man who makes policy, but I do have a growth mindset, so I think I can manage it. So thank you for coming out tonight. Yes?
Could we mention our two groups while we're all here?
Yes.
Heads Up and also Heart.
Absolutely.
Because we did talk about allyship, we do have a sign-up sheet over here on the Heart table. If anybody would like to be an ally in this Equity Alliance fight, there is a sign-up sheet. We're the small group that on the corner of School and Main Street, we stand out every first Saturday from 11 till 12. We're trying to do more, but we need more people to do that. So if you'd like to help us be an ally in this struggle, please share your name and your email, and we'd be glad to reach out to you. And I mean, people at home as well. It would be greatly appreciated if we could do more to help this Equity Alliance happen. And heads up right here. Do you have anything you want to say?
Sure. Both organizations need your help. So please reach out to us. As Reverend Randy kindly put it to me a while ago, we have the head, we have the heart, we're looking for the body.
That's great. Well, thank you again for putting this evening together, and thank you all for coming, and thank you for being our panel. Have a great night.